I'm here to have a chat with you this afternoon about some of the work that I've been involved with over the last, I guess, almost my son's lifetime at the moment. Chris is now 33 years old, and probably over the last 6 years, things got a bit serious in terms of trying to do some work that might help and support carers and parents principally who provide day-to-day care and also lifelong care. So part of this presentation today is to try to tap into that, and I just want to give you an overview of what that looks like, a sense of what that is. We've got some copies of all the slides, so you don't have to worry about taking down too much. We're also going to give you a copy of this book that was published a couple of years back, so we're going to give you that. So I'm going to work through some of that material and in a way leave you with something that will add to the weekend. Okay. Now that you're all relaxed, God, I feel relaxed too. So this is my son Chris, who I attribute as a co-author. He may not have written the words, but he certainly authored it. Okay, and I'm simply the messenger. Often Chris gets invited to do after dinner speaking because of this work, and I ring back and say, well, Chris has sent me along instead, I hope that's okay. So he's the co-author of it all, and 6 years ago the manuscript of this was put together. What about me? The question is, who is me? The reason I use the title, What About Me Too, it happens to be also one of my son's favourite tunes as well. So the question of me, I think, is a big one, and I think that's why you're here today. You know, it's one thing to provide care, it's another thing to receive care, and as carers we need that. And once we get over that hump, we can start to work forward, rather than being on the end of the line. You know what that one looks like, okay? And then we've done a series of workshops in this little overview here, which was really a process in its own right, was to, what I call, give everyone a bit of a loving shake. And sometimes we need that in order to step forward, and sometimes we can stay in denial, which I might say is a very good coping strategy, but there comes a point where things have to change, no question about that. So the workshop program started as a result. In some respects, the workshops happened before the actual publication, but we didn't want to hold back on that, so we did it, and I worked with a number of organisations in doing that. So all up about 50 or so service providers, and we've had something like about 3,000 people through those workshops across New South Wales and in rural, regional and metropolitan areas. And the other little bit that we did was this, the website, which has had a lot of international work done on it. The big hits come out of Europe all the time. It's amazing how effective that technology can be. It's amazing. You know, the emails come through. I'll spend a couple of hours every morning actually responding and sending material across the world. So at this stage, there's something like about 80 or so countries that are involved with this program as well. So not bad for an emotional father, who I am, and operating out of an office space, a third bedroom, and yet all this stuff has come together. So it's quite amazing. Oh, I blame this fellow. All right, he's responsible. I also have 2 daughters and 3 grandchildren too, which take up quite a lot of my time as well. So one daughter in particular, she's a budding mathematician, and having a mathematics background too, we spend quite a few hours talking about spirals on shells and those sorts of things, and the stars and whatever. So it's pretty good. No complaints. So what we're going to talk about is this question of resilience, and what does that look like? I know it's almost like a cliche term that's being used. It's almost like flavour of the month. And there's a lot of people talking about it, but principally it's about strengthening people who need to be able to understand their own circumstance so they can start to move forward. And part of my way of describing resilience is just 3 words. It's about understanding, knowledge and attitude. If you've got those 3 things working, things start to move in a different sort of direction. So getting through the day is a euphemism for the hour, the day, the week, the year, a generation. So really it is, you do need effective strategies in place to be able to do that. Not that I'm saying I have those answers, I don't, because all of you have to understand your own situation, and I would encourage you to stand outside your circumstance and look in. and provide that objectivity about where I am, where do I want to get to, and those questions start to come up, okay? Unless you're prepared to take that step, not much changes. We keep doing the same old stuff, okay? So I'm meant to be a little bit challenging to give you that loving shake, okay? There's a lot of unspoken conversations around care, and each parent has, and each family and each carer has their own story, and each is different. There's no question about that. But the matter of dealing with crisis is something that we're not really prepared for until we actually fall into it. And we wonder why we act or respond in the way that we do to the situation that you may or may not be in regarding your own family circumstance. It can be a time of disbelief, confusing, helplessness, not much I can do, or maybe these overwhelming emotions start to dig in. Not easy. Acceptance. Acceptance is a subject we don't even talk about. Accepting my son, who he is and what he brings, was a major break forward for me. Was it the same for my ex-wife at that time? No, she had a different set of circumstances around that. So acceptance itself is something that is so important, fundamental to the change process. And what I'd like to share with you, just a little bit that comes out of this acceptance. So in 30 seconds, I'm going to give you a one-day thing on this importance of this matter. And it fits under this question of personal and family struggles, which is I'll get to in a minute. I hear the sounds of boys playing in the street. I hear the sound of my son sleeping against my chest. It dawns on me that he won't be like other boys. The weight on my lap is nothing compared to the weight in my heart. His battered body from all the falls, a mind dim from medication and seizures, forever falling, crashing on the ground, no words to tell or express feelings, no way to know where he is going. I say goodbye to the child I wanted and welcome the child who's come instead. A boy who will always be my child, a son who brings so much yet so hard to bear. And I still feel it. No matter how many times I read that, it gets me at the end. But that's the moment. That's the feeling of acceptance that allows you, I think, to be able to understand where you might be and to move forward. And each of you would have your own story around that. There's no question about that. But do we talk about it? No. Have you talked to your spouse or your partner about that? Probably not. And each person is different. You might talk to some of your mates about it. You know, what did you do and how did you feel about it? But it's so fundamental to this question of these unspoken conversations. Okay? Coping, my God, you know. What's your coping strategy? You'd have a set of them, I'm sure. The mother who might wash everything in the house and then start all over again. The father who might disappear in the shed and comes out at the end looking for a solution. Both different sets of coping strategies. One good coping strategy is being in denial. That's a good one. I'm not ready for it yet, don't bother me, that sort of stuff, okay? It's perfectly okay, and the time will come when that change may or may not present itself. So around coping, there's understanding of the question of choice. That's a tough one, to know that you can actually choose to how you might respond to your circumstance. It's a well-known fact that you can do that. It's a learnt experience. And the more you practice it, the better you get at it. Understanding needs. How do you understand needs which continually change? Whether it's a question of care or whether it's maybe aged care. I mean, you're dealing with a whole spectrum here. So the principle there is to understand your own needs as well as the son or daughter or the person that you're caring for, as well as the circumstance that they're in, and be prepared and welcome the fact that needs will change. You can't lock them up. Stress. I think we just had an anti-stress session here now. Feeling pretty good. Well, managing stress is an important part of any coping strategy, and care should encompass stress management. There's no question about that. But if you look at care in terms of the packaging and what's available, it's very, very unusual to see something to say, I would like to provide you with some stress management. So what's stress management? Well, for you, it might be a walk around the block, that hour or so during the day. You get up early in the morning, you go to bed a bit later at night, but it's your time. And you might use that time just to de-stress and be conscious of the fact that this is your time. You know? All carers require that space. There's no question about it. Okay? Dealing with change, question of change, driven by needs that continually change. So you become change managers as well. Welcome change because that's part of the journey. Gender difference around this question of care. Guess what? It's different. I think you know that, between male and a female. Mama and a dad. Brother and a sister. They all do it differently. And yet we don't have that conversation around this question of gender difference. I say, why not? Wouldn't it be good for a mum and a dad to have a conversation about that at the beginning of their journey and not go through the dramas and the traumas of trying to manage a family without understanding their differences in terms of how they respond, rather than try and build the strength? Because it's clear that families that can actually work together and be part of that, that support that you need for each other, it's better if you can keep mum and dad together and not have the 80% of dysfunction and the breakdown that we presently experience, which is 3 times the average. Not good enough. Not good enough. So there's a lot of unspoken conversations around this, and I'm just trying to set the scene a bit, okay? So what's this missing map? What does lifelong care look like? I've had a situation where I'm pretty brazen about this sort of thing these days. I'll say to a group of people, whether they're professional people or carers or parents, that the nature of lifelong care is not understood, and there's hardly a whimper in response, often by the professional group of people who pretend or believe that they've got the full bottle, but the reality is that they don't. They play a part, an important part, but they don't necessarily work from the whole picture. So from my view of the world, we've got to deal with the whole first so we can figure out where all the bits fit together. Agreed? There's no way trying to work with the parts and try to put them together that way. It's not a...
Sorry, there's also the people, doctors or professionals or whatever that are there for that
purpose.
But they are not responsible for the decisions that are made. And they think they come up with often with this one-eyed view that this is the right way, it's the only way. Whatever.
Correct.
And we are the ones that know best. We are the ones that have to take responsibility.
I agree with you. The well-intended professor, as good as they might be in the discipline that they are, and you can't contest their authority in that area, really has had no experience or no real understanding on the nature of lifelong care, and yet they profess to provide that guidance. So I'm saying the well-intended professors just accept it for where they are, but knowing full well that they're only part of their role, okay? There are too many families who carry that as a burden throughout life because it was said early in the journey this would be the situation. It doesn't work. They don't know. Now, I'm picking on the good professors, but they're also equally true in the area of legal, financial as well. They don't know. But you as parents can try to pull these bits together, which is what I'm endeavouring to do today, and that's the bit I'm going to give you. So the nature of lifelong care looks something like that. 3 milestones, for want of a better way of describing them. Family and personal struggles, that's where some of the unspoken conversations take place. Questions of crisis, acceptance and coping, gender difference, we can bundle them up pretty well in there. The next milestone I talk about is family care. It's just a term that I've invented because it, to me, describes the full suite of need rather than just the bits of need, okay? So family care often falls to personal care, care accommodation, safeguards and independence. Safeguards are about personal values. Safeguards are about assurance that your son or daughter or person you're looking after will be looked after in a way that you want them to be looked after. That's that quality assurance type stuff, but without using that phrase. Safeguards can also be the legal arrangements around your estate or your family in terms of ensuring that there are structures in place that will look after your son or daughter or person that in the absence of yourself. So as parents get older, that becomes a really important part of feeling they're in control and things are now in place. So if we had a lot of older parents here, that would be a principal focus. Personal wills, setting up guardianship, a whole lot of stuff around that. So in the template that I'm going to go through, I'll touch on that. And then the last one, I think, where do we want to get to? I think it's called something like peace of mind. Knowing that you're giving it your best shot, knowing that there's not much more you could have done and feeling satisfied with that. Knowing you can also let go in terms of a sense of having other people involved with the solution of care and being comfortable with that. My son, Chris, I pick him up on Fridays and he used to stay with me for the entire weekend. But he also stays with Sunnyfield. I don't know whether you know Sunnyfield. And he'll say to me Saturday afternoon, I've had enough. It's time to go. I think, you ungrateful little, but I'm lovely. I think it's wonderful that he has this sense of 2 homes, and there's more going on back in the group home that he's in, rather than putting up with his old dad who makes him do stuff. You know, we can't go anywhere, Chris, until you finish the vacuuming. Now he's standing there with a vacuum cleaner. Finished, he says. I said, no, you haven't done enough. So he stands there a bit, and then we go to Macca's or whatever we might do. So I give him jobs to do as part of the things that we do together. And what ties all this together? Well, there's a number of strategies, which is what the book or the publication reflects. This question of who really cares. Well, it's a group of people who I call a family of people. You're close, you're intimate, you actually understand the needs of the person, you're drawn to that. So it could be professional people, carers, family members, the next door neighbour, it doesn't matter who it is. It's your family of support that you're talking about. Active parents, working on support and knowledge. Being just a parent is not enough. Well, that's meant to be a bit challenging, because being a mum or a dad is not enough in terms of some of the processes you go through. Sometimes you need to become the advocate and maybe the legal guardian as well. So there's a number of roles you actually play in the things that you do. A lot of it's based on greater understanding and knowledge, and where to go, who to talk to, and the manner in which you present. Wise parent planning, time of change, moving forward and managing that change. Family care, that full suite of care I talked about, and maybe this peace of mind, outcomes and letting go. This is just a little summary of where the workshop program had taken place. You can see there's quite a few dots here, and there's more than that. But primarily the purpose of the workshops is to allow people to go through their own process. It's not good enough just to give them a book and think that's the answer. It's not going to work. What has to happen is that you draw from the knowledge that's been gathered together by literally thousands of families and draw the bits that you think are relevant to your circumstance, and that's the process, which is what this is about. So what we're doing today is a bit of a mini workshop in that respect. What have I got there? Understand the nature of life care, build a network with people, that's a good thing, not knowing you're not alone, and also other people that can come into your life for a reason, you know that old poem, they do, and there's no question. Participants encouraged to consider their circumstance, a process, and the format is based on interaction and workshops and working through your worksheets and stuff, okay? So in the absence of that today, you can see this is part of the background to what we're trying to do. And I guess for a lot of parents and carers is that they're dealing with the past, present and future. Blame, guilt, failure, that's only just part of the emotional turmoil that you could be involved with. If only I had done, getting the right advice, doing the right thing, where to go, I didn't know that, where are we? Coping strategies, one step at a time. So they're the feedbacks that have come out of the workshops in terms of the major issues that a lot of families are facing, which will probably only confirm what you're doing. And understanding needs is this business of learning how to stand outside your circumstance and look in. Really, it's not easy, because in that you see yourself. And you wonder why you did what you did, but no, don't hold any blame to that. Simply see it as an opportunity to take another step, okay? So in terms of standing outside, looking in and building up in the background, there is a whole lot of material that's come out of the questionnaires that we use to rate the material, and a lot of this needs have actually been aggregated into the work that you're now looking at. What are the findings? Lifelong care is not understood, no question about that. I mean, I don't think there'd be a person in the room that, and I wouldn't be one of those either, to put up my hand and say, I know it all. I don't. So the situation seems to be, the more you seem to be involved, the less you know. It's one of those things. It just turns up other issues, other concerns and so on. How am I going to cope with Chris as he gets older and I get older, and my ability to be able to manage him? I don't know. But I've got that on my things to figure out, on my plan, okay? Short and long-term strategies, building the big picture, which gets back to that milestone map that I showed you. And also realising that these things are actually dependent on each other. So if you've got family and personal struggles happening, no amount of care is ever going to be effective, because you're going to be drawn into the other. So family and personal struggles erodes those care arrangements. So in some respects, you've got to strengthen that family and personal struggle area, which is that first milestone. So that has to be managed. The personal family struggle part of it all, a lot of change in that area. And then there's the suite of care that we talk about. And there's also that not losing sight of the goal, that peace of mind that we want to get to, okay? guess what? They're different. Rural areas are far different to metropolitan areas in terms of needs. I wonder if you wonder why that's so. I think it comes down to community again. Where community is strong in the country setting. I know just too many mums who got together in certain towns, and because they didn't have any support at all, they made it happen. They did it. They actually got the people together, they got the property together, they got council to help work with them, and before you knew it, they had a respite program going in Dubbo, Forbes, Gunnedah. They don't have the support. I mean, a guy at Broken Hill said to me, I don't suppose you'd be interested in coming out here, nobody else does. And I said, well, what makes you think that? Because you know what NSW stands for? I said, New South Wales? No. Newcastle, Sydney, Wollongong. So again, there's a lot of isolation in terms of community areas, such as rural areas, where they have to find the solutions internally. And so therefore, there's a different set of needs. There's the strengths and weaknesses in both sets of circumstances, whether it's regional, rural or metropolitan, different. The process of identifying needs is just about almost non-existent, which is one of the reasons why I've gone through these workshops. Imagine going through maybe a 2-day workshop, pretty full on, 15 sessions, and some of the things we talk about in those sessions are, I'll just quickly run through the headings. Who really cares, making changes, getting through the day, supported living, planning for tomorrow, taking care, that's all about looking after yourselves. Brothers and sisters, we often don't talk about the siblings. Inclusion and vulnerability, those icky subjects of what it's like to be accepted within a community that might get up in the middle of a food hall and walk away from a group of people who just come from a group home. What's your response to that? It happens. Not being involved, those questions, how can you encourage involvement and so on. So if we know what it is we're looking at, we can then make some strategies to avoid some of those situations. Peace of mind, community living, milestones and challenges, day-to-day lifelong care and peace of mind. So they're the sort of processes that we look at in terms of trying to work way through it all. So there's no way that I can, in an hour, give you that. I'm setting the scene for that, okay? Let me get to where I want to get to. Part of it is a basic need of feeling in control, feel positive. Do I feel like I'm in control? Well, one day I might be, and the next day something happens and I don't. That's true of most families. But that's where we want to get to. So feel in control, feel positive is part of what I see primarily in this personal and family struggle area. Support needs, respite, long-term care. Do we have adequate support in that area? If the answer is probably no, in fact it's definitely no. 98% of care in New South Wales is provided by Parents Incorporated. Right, what am I saying? It's in the family home. Why? Because of limited funding and so on. There's 5,800 accommodation services and there's something like 200,000 families in New South Wales alone. Grim reality. And I think you probably know of other people who are in that situation. And you've got to compete. My crisis is bigger than your crisis, and if I can establish that, therefore I might get some support for 6 months, 3 months, or a year, or whatever. The process is flawed, and it tends to not look at the question of those people who are just getting by, but underneath it all, they're paddling mad like ducks underwater, right? Huh? We can't let that continue. Then the questions around safeguards and financial plans and stress levels. That's an important part of it all. And I guess this weekend is dealing with some of this, okay? Standing outside, looking in, sharing thoughts, whatever it might come up. If you get a couple of things coming out of this weekend, well then it's been worthwhile, I think. Okay. Now we've got this question of personal choice, and it comes straight out of the publication. And the story behind this is not new. It's been around for a long time. Questions like, what is my response in difficult circumstances? The Viktor Frankls of the world, who was a fellow, was caught up in a concentration camp, who wrote a book about it in the 50s, and has been the cornerstone of a lot of this work, basically said there was something in him that allowed him to get through 5 years of absolute despair. Now, what was it? And that was his attempt to actually talk about that. And the principal conclusion he came out of was you may be in the most difficult circumstance, but the thing that you can manage is your response to any circumstance. That's pretty challenging, isn't it? Might take you I don't know, a year, month, week, millisecond, I don't know. But you can choose to how you might respond to that. So it comes down to what I've tried to put together here is a simple little diagram which talks about the challenges, experience, love, emotion, well-being, and talk about the decision point with personal struggles. Is the glass half empty or half full? That's a bit trite. But it's primarily about knowing that if I take my son somewhere and he experiences this maybe, I don't know, once, twice a month or whatever it might be, attitude, a glare, something might say something, because he looks different, right? That rejection that he goes through makes me feel the importance of belonging. So I welcome it. Hey, thank you, Mr. Adolescent teenager who hasn't got a clue in the world. You just reminded me of what's important to my son and how I'm going to respond to that. But don't mess with him. That's the advocate coming through. Huh? You know that feeling? So basically that was an intention. I know it's very difficult to do this in a short space of time, but that picture, I hope, gives you something as to where you might be. So each of those negative situations can, in fact, be inverted into a positive outcome. Just got to keep practicing.
I think you have to be a very strong person in yourself to be able to give that. Because if you're feeling low or if you're a bit under the pump for whatever reason, just that response that you gave is one that if you're feeling strong.
Yeah, absolutely. And it may not be the time to do it.
Feel like completely
No, agreed.
and defeated by something like
Yeah, but just have that little thought in the back of your mind. I'll just take that on, you know, I don't have to do anything, you know.
that.
But
Just like to knock you out.
yeah, that sort of stuff, you know. But you can know internally you might make that response, you see what I mean? And the only way you can do that is keep practicing it. The more you practice it, the better you get at it. If I was talking about personal struggles around care, I feel it's fundamental that this question needs to be at least considered and understood. Just a little bit, that's all it is. Okay, and primarily what I'm talking about is the choice between hope and despair. Do I really want to despair? No, I don't, but I feel that way, you know. Do I feel guilty with Chris? You betcha I do. But then I can turn the guilt round into another view of where he might be. Every time I drop him off and I go home and I see the mess on the table that he's left and whatever, straight away I miss him. And it's that sense of, what do you call it? It's like an ongoing process of dealing with feelings of guilt. But it's not guilt because it's like a cloud where a thought or an action or a situation may trigger it. And the tear comes or the thought comes or whatever, and then you've got to respond to that. Well, part of my response is I try to keep myself busy, I distract myself, I maybe put on some music going home in the car or whatever it might be. But I've learnt to welcome it rather than try to reject it. So it's the welcoming of it that allows you to be able to let it go. Interesting. I don't know whether you've experienced that, rather than trying to resist it. If I can pick on the doctors who don't want to be emotionally involved, well, I don't think they can be a good doctor if they can't be emotionally involved. Why? Because principally they want to look after themselves by resisting it. Well, guess what? That's going to get them sooner or later. And so in some ways you have to embrace it. So there's a lot of philosophies that says embrace it so you can let it go. And that's this work simply confirms that. Around personal sets of needs, what that might be. Remember, at a family level, there's a set of needs, and at a personal level, there are a set of needs. And just to compound it a bit difficultly, just to compound the whole situation, you've got these different stages that you might be at, and down here is peace of mind. So you still might be involved with personal and family struggle stuff, and you've got a set of needs for that, and you're trying to head towards putting in place some care arrangements, and you've got another set of needs. So these things continually change. So it's not straightforward, but somehow or other the parent has become the conductor of a fairly discordant orchestra that we call care industry. And that doesn't mean to be critical. I welcome that because moves have happened to improve that, but we've still got a way to go. Okay. Another set of needs here. I'll get on. Now I'm going to put you all through a stress test. You ready? I'm going to prove to you you're stressed. Okay, here we go. Following slide has two identical dolphins and used as a case study for understanding stress levels. Look at both dolphins. The dolphins are identical. A closely monitored scientific study revealed that, in spite of the fact that the dolphins are identical, a person under stress would find differences in the two dolphins. The more differences a person finds, the more stress that person has experienced. Carefully examine the photograph. If you find a difference, you may need a break. You ready? Is there a difference? Hey, God, he's need a break, guys. So, again, stress is something that is individual. I know that, okay, and we're not going to come up with a quick formula. But interesting enough, when we talk about average lifetime stress levels, we talk about it being correlated to, this is the mathematician talking now, but at an age level. And often the stress levels are really high in the early stages, and they sort of peter out a bit, and then they go up again in this 20 to 30, and then the 50 to 60. That relates to a care profile. It does. So we're dealing with these peaks of despair. Welcome them, because they're going to come. Values of repair. That's the time you pick when you start doing some stuff, when you feel you're in control and you can do a few things, right? So it's not an immediate solution, it's about where you are. And I think the underlying part of this, of course, is the question of coping skills, stress skills, and so on, okay? So you pick the time with which you feel you can do things. So the story for aged parents is they need to do some stuff before they get too old. Is that fair? I think so. I'm starting to feel that now that in my old age, not that I'm that old, but I see some of my colleagues who are similar age, and we're a little bit different in the way we go about things. But having things in place, I think, has strengthened a lot of families, rather than families at the age of 70, 80, and maybe even 90, for the first time trying to put things into place. It's, in hindsight, I know the Bert and Thelmas of the world that have come into my world as elderly parents, who did everything they could do for their daughter, but hadn't put anything in place at the time of when they could least do it. So I'm thankful for Bert and Thelma, because it's pointed out the importance of this. And if they were still with us now, they would be able to say that to you. Get some things into place, as Bert would say, the builder, and Thelma, the nurse, believing that all that was required was just care. Well, it wasn't sufficient in the end. Okay. So we can draw from that in terms of their legacy and what we learned from it, okay? And I guess that's what we're doing. Stress is a real killer in its own ways, and we need some ways to be able to manage it a lot better than what we do. So in just a couple of dot points, share the care, I think, is fundamental, if that's possible. Learning how to manage personal struggles, which is what we're here today working on. Other activities, it's equivalent of going for a swim or a run or something. Or I had a mum who was a real fervent knitter. She'd be sitting here knitting, right? It was a bit distracting at first, but I realised when she started to get a bit stressed, her knitting levels went up quicker, right? And that was her way of coping. So some activity where you can immerse yourself in. For me, it's swimming or going for a bit of a run. Regular exercise, and of course this question of self-care. Now, you can either do a 10-week stress course, and that's how long they take, but you can develop your own strategies around. So it's just recognise that it's there. So where to from here? Well, I'm going to make just a couple of little suggestions around building a day-to-day, long-term, lifelong care plan. But it's not just a plan, it's actually a working document. The document will allow you to put what you know down in that process, your knowledge, understanding. There's a cathartic experience in doing that, because you feel like you're in control once you actually start to putting these things down. Why do you put them down? Well, there's a communication part of it all that you can share with other professional people. So if you're talking to a caseworker or maybe a service provider, you can use the front end part of it all, which is all about the person. What makes them tick, what their likes, dislikes. That's all good stuff to know if you're going to talk about care. And if you're talking to maybe a legal person in terms of getting a will or guardianship in place, you might just pull out the back part and say, right, this is what I would like to do, and make them work with you to achieve your outcomes, rather than taking the standard legal solutions. So it's a bit provocative and audacious to think that the emotional parent can actually do this? And the answer is they can. Okay. So the profile is an important part of it all. Where you guys are at the moment, where to from now, if you can think of maybe there's 3 key points: understanding, knowledge, attitude, are key parts of being able to move forward, no question. There's a lot of detail around directory of services, who to talk to and whatever. I'm not going to go into that detail. But just knowing that that's part of the bundle, knowing that in doing that, you can then start to move forward in many other ways. In fact, you become almost like, what do you call, leaders in your own area, because you might have some of your own friends in your own area where you might go and have a cup of tea with them and talk with them, and a couple of little words from you can also help them. And we've got this facilitating going on, sharing experience, sharing knowledge. Those people to know that they're not alone, you know, that one. So basically it's this process of building, and also sometimes when you start to articulate your own sets of needs, you think, my God, did I say that? Because it's come out in a way that makes you understand where you may be. So the question is now building a process by which you can do. So in doing that, do we actually make copies of that? Okay, I'll give it to you at the end. The purpose of the template is just a 20-page thing. There are 3 levels to all this work. There's the body of knowledge, which sort of gives you a bit of a loving shake, right? It's meant to be. If you can't make changes, you're not going to move forward. Then there's the process, which allows you to work your way through it, and some of you perhaps might be doing that already. And then on top of that again is the template, which becomes your working document. Everything you know, everything you think about. Now, what are you going to do with that? For one thing, it becomes a day-to-day useful process, but you also may be able to include that with a personal will. You may, if you're going to talk about setting up a trust or whatever arrangement might be, you can use that as the purpose of the trust. There's a whole lot of things that you can do with it. It's that creative element that allows you to have a body of knowledge by which you can then adapt to suit your circumstance, okay? And guess what? You're the person who does that. Basically, it's a practical way to manage it. So if you, for instance, if you're dealing with a different sets of carers, you may be, like I am with my son, I give them that half a page dot point thing just to consider what Chris likes, what he dislikes, what makes him work, communication, that sort of stuff. Helps manage the question of professionals and service providers. The spoken word is not as effective as the written word. And as the advocate now I can say, I've given you that information, and if something comes up, and it usually doesn't because you've actually had good communication, there's a question now of my choice, whether it's a libelous situation because I've now given you the information and you failed to act on it. But that doesn't happen. It's like Murphy's Law. Once you've got things into place, you don't need it. It's funny. It's just the way it works. It also gives you a greater feeling of control. You invest some agony into the process, and I mean that in a positive way, by putting your own sort of blood into the process. It means a lot more to you because you own it. It's your thing. It's your working document. It's that bit of paper that you might have in your handbag when you go off to a meeting, and you put that bit of paper on the desk of the person. It also could be a USB that you might want to just plug into another organisation's record and say, do you want some information about my son or daughter or person? Here it is. It could be aged care as well. So there's a number of ways of doing that, and you feel like you're in control. Question of understanding needs, an important part of it all. And also, why do you do it if for no other reason? It's a coordinated approach with care, safeguards, financial and legal arrangements. Now, if they're not compelling reasons, I don't know what might be. So I've just tried to give you a picture of what that is. And now we're going to go through basically just the headings of the template. Now, James is just a euphemism. The idea of the template as a Word document, you'd save it as a Word document and put in the name of your own person, son or daughter's name. And having saved it, you then just go through and delete the bits that don't apply, which might take you, I don't know, half an hour. And then once you've deleted it, and still keep the headings in place, you can then have another sweep where you then might put the bits that you want to put in. So I'm hoping, we've done it with some parents where after a couple of hours they've been able to walk out the door with their own plan without it being too onerous. So we've used the technology to try to make it easy, okay?
Is that document on the website?
No, not yet. No, it will be. Normally, we give you a USB.
Or we can send out some USBs.
Mm. And then you can just do a save as. And in it, there's a set of instructions about what to do. What does it look like? Well, it starts off with the person. No surprises there. Doesn't talk about their condition until about page 3. So we often lose sight of the person. So who is James? What makes him tick? And what's the objective of the plan? Well, it's described by his dream. Okay, I dream to be included. I dream to belong. I dream to be involved. It's those sorts of things. Rather than a goal or an objective, it's the person talking in the first person. I like to do this. I want to do this. Huh? It's that stuff. So if you can give a voice to your son or daughter, it's them talking. It's you, but it's them. You get it? So we often don't ask them. I mean, I can go into meetings with Chris and immediately it'll fall to me and I'll say, well, ask Chris. But it's a natural human condition not to ask somebody who you think can't respond anyway, right? But I want him to be included. So it's that balance you've got to try and find with it all. So it's largely articulating his voice. What's important to him? What's his likes and dislikes? And they're all just dot points. Too many words don't go anywhere. Little few words are better, okay? What's his favourite activities? So that becomes a distracting type of strategy in terms of everything goes wrong. And what people like and admire about James. Well, that's to do with what's called personal valorisation. Have you come across that term before? A fellow called Dr. Wolfensberger. You know him? Wolfie? Have you heard of that name, anyone? Wolfensberger? Big, strong social advocate, comes out of West Washington. I met him in the late 90s up in Brisbane. And he talked about value in a person, and he tried to describe value. And valorisation, in a sense, is actually putting a person, such as Chris, in a position which has leadership, has relationship, and is creative. So if he wants to make a mess with pouring a cup of tea or maybe drawing on a bit of paper or whatever, that's okay because that's what he does. So in some ways, the value that you put him in, it can be measured in those 3 elements: leadership, relationship and creativity. Like a lot of people in care, the most important thing for them is relationship. You agree? You get the relationship right and everything else follows. So for heaven's sakes, don't put him in a position where there's lousy relationships or authoritarian type of people around him, bossing him around. That's not going to work. So relationship is be all and end all. So that's what this is about. People like and admire about James. That's his personal value. Why is he so valuable? You know, why? You know? And everyone's got something. The challenge is for us to express that. And then we get on to page 3, and what people need to know and to do to support James. That's when we talk about the disability, the question of needs, the question of maybe dental care, the questions of anything else. And that's the bit of paper that you may be asked at least 50 times in your lifetime to say what's going on with Chris, what's going on with James. So you've got a very clear description of that. Don't rely on trying to describe it verbally. You're better off to leave something that's been well thought through and well documented, okay? In the case of Chris, I also have a little chart which actually tracks his epilepsy as well. So I happily will give that to a neurologist and he might say, oh, this would be good for my other clients as well. And I wonder why he doesn't have it for his other clients. But again, he sees me as the emotional father and I'm happy to do that, but I also would like him to do a good job with my son. So I give him lots of good information, right? So it's not a battle, it's a working together type of ethos, okay? Personal needs, behaviour, anything to do with that. The nature of people who support James best, there's an expectation there. There are certain people who work better with Chris than other sorts of people. So I, as the audacious parent, will actually prescribe who they are. Bit different? And then how James might communicate. And then I've got a bucket here called things to figure out. Because as you go through this process, there will be other things that you need to understand. And so you might hold on to that for the time when somebody might come to you and say, hi, I'm your friendly whoever, I'm here to help you. What can I help you with? You say, I'm glad you asked me that question. Here's the half a dozen points. But consciously you start working on it anyway. Okay, you may not have a solution, but you've got some questions around that. There's one more page to go here. how people will care for James, the roles of people and trustees. You notice I've actually linked other people into this. Trustees could also involve executors of a will as well. The nature of the role of care actually ties all these elements together because they're the same. It's the same, and it's the care elements that actually pulls all these uncoordinated elements together. So what's their role? The other part of their role can be defined at either an international, national or state level. Why do you do that? Because you also could become the advocate that says fundamental rights are not being acknowledged or being purported to be cared for. So if you want to win an argument, and I might say that's not the purpose for doing it, but it gives you a wonderful framework to actually spell out what the role of carers is. Fundamental rights there's a whole lot of legislative requirements in place now that if fundamental rights and integrity of a person is not being cared for, there's libelous questions around that, okay? So I'm now talking as the advocate, okay, not just the parent. The other part is a bit tokenistic. It's James's parents and sibling needs, but we need to understand some of those as well. It's my understanding that if you look after the entire family, you have a better solution than just looking after the individual. So we need to understand what that might be, including siblings and everybody else. So again, the articulation of their needs is important. What are the financial arrangements? The questions of structures and how they might be put together with a view to provide care in the absence of yourself, or maybe a long-term care, or maybe financial arrangements in terms with the rest of the family involved. So we can think that through. Disability support pension, trust arrangements and any financial structures. For me, a financial structure could simply be just a trustee bank account. Okay, simple as that. That's a form of a structure. And does it have a purpose? Yes, it does. Okay. So, and then the other final question is then what are the legal arrangements? So they're the headings that come out of the template. Normally I'd put people to sleep after 2 hours of this one, and I'm trying to keep going with it all, but normally we try to spread it over a day or two. And as you work through the material, you've actually got a number of points that might come out under each of these headings, you see? That's how we work our way through it. And so basically what I've done is given you a quick overview of what it is. I've given you some little understanding points that may or may not resonate. So that's about it. I know after lunch, and hear somebody talk like this, it's all too much, right? But again, that's that shake, okay? It's given from the heart, all this stuff, all right? It's not a academic exercise up here, well structured with tables and footnotes. It's simply a reflection of a lot of other carers' experience. And this is what it looks like. So the question now is, what are you going to do? The question is, what can you take? You're going to take some small steps, which I recommend, rather than big steps. Little steps are better than big steps. Or do you have to wait until there's a situation where you then have to take big steps? I'd much rather work through that. The reason I encourage you to take the small steps is you also feel like you're in control. The beginning of that. So today is the day with which I'm going to take that first step. Today is the day I'm going to think about this in terms of my own needs. Today is the day I'm going to talk about gender difference. Today is the day I'm going to look at how I manage crisis. Today is the day I'm going to look at what my personal and family struggles, because I know that if that's not manageable, some of this other stuff's not going to be effective. You've got an overall plan that you can now work through. So it's really a situation now where you can just draw from it, from what you want to do, okay? Happy to do that, and I hope that's given you something to think about.